Hello, everybody. Welcome into GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Thursday, February 20th. Hope everybody is having a great day so far. We have a lot to get into. Some massive news coming out of the NBA as Victor Wembanyama, the superstar Frenchman, has now come down with a blood clot and is done for the season, as well as Bobby Portis being suspended 25 games today for taking a banned substance. We also have some news out of the world of hockey, as the Four Nations Cup is about to start the finale between the US and Canada. We'll get into that game in just a bit. Then we will turn our attention over to some news in the NFL, as the cap has risen almost $20 to $25 million. Then we continue our series, previewing the offseason for the Carolina Panthers and the regular season for the Houston Astros. But before we get into any of that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you're on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Thursday, February 20th. But like I was saying, we are going to get into our first topic here, that having to do with the big news out of the NBA. Victor Wembanyama, the future superstar center for the San Antonio Spurs, is done for the season. He has been diagnosed with deep vein thrombosis in the right shoulder, which is just another way to say he has a blood clot. The Spurs say this is an isolated incident and that he should make a full recovery, but with a blood clot, there becomes a couple of different complications. This isn't the first NBA guy in recent history to have a blood clot, to have a similar injury. Obviously, Chris Bosh's career ended because of a blood clot. Now, his was more in the lung, so it's not in the same area. But the reason that he had to end his career is because it came back. He had the surgery, he came back, and then it came back again, and he had to take blood thinning medicine. If he got cut in the game, would have been too risky. So there's a really bad thing for this to end up being, right? This could be something that ends his career just 1.5 seasons into it. Brandon Ingram, another situation, he has come all the way back. He had a very similar blood clot in the shoulder. He won Comeback Player of the year after it happened. He had something called thoracic outlook decompression surgery. It's something that a lot of pitchers in baseball get when a similar thing happens. It's when you have a lot of motions with your arm going above the head. That, again, is pitching, is shooting. So that's something that has been shown to work. This is something that is going to be a major, major deal for the San Antonio Spurs as they were trying to make a playoff push. We had Victor Wembanyama, who was the league leader or the projected leader for Defensive Player of the Year this season, shooting 47% from the field, 35% from three on 8.8 attempts, along with 83% from the field goal, 24, 11, and 3, leading the league in blocks at 3.8 per game and 1.1 steals per game. He has been a menace on the defensive end as well as on the offensive end. This puts the Spurs in a tough position. The Spurs right now are at 23-29 on this season. They're just 4 games out of the 10 seed that would have gotten them into the play-in tournament. But now it feels like this season is more of just run it back for next year. You also have some issues with De'Aaron Fox, the guard that they traded for to pair with Victor Wembanyama. He's got an injured finger that has been requires surgery. He most likely will take the rest of the season off to get that fixed. But for the Spurs, for Victor Wembanyama, this is something that outside of this season, which is lost at this point, they can get another draft pick. They can go out and continue to build on what they've done already. The real concern is for his future. This is not something that they can guarantee is going to go away forever, right? This is not something that they can guarantee is going to be an easy fix. Again, we've seen guys lose their career over this. We've also seen guys come back just as strong. Brandon Ingram as an example there. So everything, we're all hoping that Victor Wembanyama can come back and be amazing, because what he's done in his first year and a half in the NBA, what he looked like he was on track to do was incredibly special. He already was the best defensive player in all of the NBA. His offense continues to get better as he continues to develop and get more players around him to help his game. He was already arguably a top 10 player in the NBA in the next couple seasons if he can get back out there. And this has been the concern with him his whole career, right? Through his early career, right? We've all been concerned about whether or not he could stay healthy as a 7'5" guy, right? And this is one of those freak things that just kind of pops up out of nowhere. Said he was feeling discomfort and a little bit sluggish after the All-Star game, got it checked out. Thank God they caught it before it got too bad. But this is something that obviously you're going to need to take time to recover. These are not quick things to fix, not quick things to recover from, and they are things that can come back. They're very dangerous. So he's done for the season now. Hopefully he can come back, and hopefully it is an isolated event. Against the Spurs, say it is an isolated event, so it should not be too big of an issue, but it is something to keep an eye on when he returns back to the court in the 2026-2027 NBA season. But outside of that, in the NBA, there were some more big news today, as Bobby Portis, the backup center for the Milwaukee Bucks, was suspended 25 games for taking a banned substance. He ended up taking tramadol. Tramadol, a painkiller found in his system. He said it was a mix-up. He said he was trying to go out and take some Toradol. Toradol is another drug that does basically the exact same thing as tramadol. Tramadol was banned in the last offseason, so it hasn't been too long since it was, and maybe that was something that he used to take, had to switch over. This is a really rough loss for the Bucks, though, as well, right? We take a look at this Bucks team. This is a team that, despite having Giannis and Brook Lopez, is really not that deep at the front court. You have a guy in Bobby Portis who's always been a spark plug off the bench for them. The Bucks have been in a weird spot with this team, right? They made a move at the trade deadline, trading for Kyle Kuzma, trying to get moving off of a guy who just wasn't really working for them in Chris Middleton. They both needed changes of scenery, but this is a team that's kind of stuck in a weird spot. They're not in that top tier in the Eastern Conference, but they're also clearly better than a lot of these other teams. You have Damian Lillard, you have Giannis Antetokounmpo, but now they're at risk of falling out of the top 4 in the East. They're at risk of not hosting a playoff game this year for the first time in a very, very long time since Giannis has been there. And I'm really curious to see how this affects the Bucks. It's not good for their future. It's not good for their season. He should be back near the end of the regular season. The question is, how are the Bucks going to be until then? Without Bobby Portis, they're not going to have that spark plug guy. They're going to need Kyle Kuzma to really step up, really improve, as he's shooting his worst of his career. Shooting splits are all down for Kyle Kuzma this season. Giannis has been playing amazing as of late, and Dame and him both made the All-Star game for a reason. But Giannis also dealing with an injury. We saw this really sink them in the playoffs last season. Can they go out and can they fix this issue? I'm a little bit concerned about the Bucks heading into the playoffs, but they should be able to have Bobby Portis back before the playoffs are done. Just not going to, most likely not going to be hosting anymore. But let me know what your thoughts are on either of these two things. Massive deals for two teams, one out in the East and one out in the West. We'll keep an eye on all the developing stories in the NBA, but we're going to take a quick break here. When we come back, we turn our attention over to the NHL. On the ice, one of the biggest hockey games in nearly 40 years. The USA hockey team is taking on the Canadian hockey team right now as the finals of the Four Nation Cup puck drop happened just about 10 minutes ago. We'll talk about what's going on in the game, what I expect to happen in the game, and why it's such a huge matchup in the first place. We'll be right back here on GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, some losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back to GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Thursday, February 20th. Hope everybody's having a great day so far. If you are just tuning in, we just finished talking about some of the big news coming out of the NBA as one of the top players in the league. Victor Wembanyama is done for the season after coming down with deep vein thrombosis or a blood clot in the right shoulder. In this segment, we turn our attention to one of the biggest sporting events in hockey history, really, at least in U.S. hockey history, as the U.S. takes on Canada in a rematch from Saturday's incredibly physical game. We're going to talk about why it has so much meaning and what I expect to happen in this game. But before we do that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you're on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Thursday, February 20th. But like I was saying, we are going to get into a little bit of the Four Nations face-off. The Four Nations final. These two teams, Canada and the U.S., the favorites coming into the tournament, made it all the way where they were expected to be. We saw the U.S. in the first matchup take care of business in Montreal 3-1 in what was an incredibly physical game. A game that had 3 fights in the first 9 seconds of action, almost 20 more hits than the average NHL game, and one that saw these two teams really show that this is a game that the players care about a lot. This is the first international hockey action that the NHL has been able to participate in, the NHL players have been able to participate in 10 years. That's because the NHL and the IIHF, the International Hockey Federation, have had a little bit of issues over the last couple seasons. The NHL in the CBA said they weren't going to let the players play. They were going to keep their season going in the midst of these big tournaments, the Olympics, the World Cups. They went out there, and with a new CBA, they said, we're going to let these guys go represent their country. So on top of everything that's going into this game, the tension from 10 years of not being able to represent your country for these guys, of skipping out on multiple tournaments for Sidney Crosby to play with Connor McDavid on this Canada team, it finally comes to a head today in the finals of the Four Nations face-off. You had Sweden and Finland take these teams to the wire, to overtime, beat the U.S., beat Canada, but now it's come down to the two favorites. We have the U.S., who are a brick wall on defense and in goal, go up against one of the highest flying offenses in the history of hockey that has ever been put together. The real question in this game is going to be, what is this game going to look like for Canada's netminder. Jordan Binnington is expected to be in net for this one, and in this tournament, he hasn't necessarily been his best. In 3 games, he's got a 2.6 goals allowed against average per game and a 892 save percentage. So he has not been playing great hockey. On the other side of the spectrum, you have Connor Hellebuyck, who's arguably the best goalie in the world right now. He comes in allowing just 1 goal per game and over a 950 save percentage. He is having an incredible tournament for this US team. But this is something that has really captured the attention of the nation, right? Usually a hockey tournament flies a little bit under the radar. This is the biggest game for both Canadian hockey and US hockey since the 1970s or the 1980s, right? There's been a lot of talk in the US that this is the biggest game since the 1980 Miracle game against the USSR, right? And in Canada, there's a lot of talk as well. People are saying this is the biggest game since the US-Canada match in 2010, or even it's the biggest game since their own match versus the USSR in 1972. So this is a huge game for both countries. And obviously, a lot of this ties to some of the stuff off of the ice, but at the same time, it's also on the ice, right? These two teams went out and showed up for their countries. Again, they don't get to represent it. The fans noticed. The tickets for this event have absolutely skyrocketed. If you were trying to go to this game, you can't get in any cheaper than about $900, and you can get in for as expensive as a couple thousand. There were even some tickets going for $10,000 in this game. Now, a couple injury news for the U.S. The Canada team is completely healthy, but a lot of the big stars had some question marks for the U.S. One of the best defensemen, a member of the Boston Bruins. This game is in Boston. Charlie McAvoy is out for this game. His shoulder injury got infected. The Boston Bruins not very happy about that. They have the Minnesota Wild's training staff as the medical team for the U.S. hockey team, and they had some issues, the Boston Bruins and the Minnesota Wild in the past. Charlie McAvoy is out. The Boston Bruins obviously not very happy, but this sucks because he is a huge physical player for the U.S. team, and that's where they were really more dominant against them last time. They out-physicaled them. They bullied the other team. It was a Canada team that is filled with star power, filled with skill and finesse, but the U.S. team is big, physical, and they will rough you up, which is, I think, the best way to take on this Canada team. Make sure they can't get comfortable. Make sure they can't get to their spots. Make sure that they can't get what they need to done early in this contest. The other stars for this team, Austin Matthews is expected to play the big goal-scoring threat for the U.S. team. The Tkachuk brothers, the guys that really led this thing off, started off this rivalry game with a bang, making 2 fights in the first 2 seconds between them. Matthew Tkachuk got hurt in the Canada game, had to leave in the third period, is expected to play. His brother Brady Tkachuk is also expected to play. He left in the final game of the round-robin tournament after playing just 2 minutes. He slammed into a wall, and they say they kept him out after as a precaution. Now, the U.S. team did bring in Tage Thompson, the star forward from the Buffalo Sabres, as an injury reserve just in case anybody couldn't go, but everybody should be able to go. One of the big question marks before this game was whether or not the U.S. would be able to bring in Quinn Hughes. The defenseman for the Vancouver Canucks, a U.S. native, had come in and was expected to be a part of the team before he suffered an injury of his own. He was unable to get cleared medically for this one. He is in Boston right now, reports say, but Quinn Hughes not able to go out and play for this U.S. team. The U.S. team has been informed that they are not allowed to go and bring in Quinn Hughes. Canada, again, the big question in this game, like I said, is going to be how will Jordan Binnington play? Because it's going to be offense versus goaltending. And the way that I look at it is the fact that goaltending wins championships, right? You don't see games go down, especially in hockey, where if you don't have a great goaltender, especially when these games matter the most, the speed is at its highest. These are games that are being played at the fastest, at Stanley Cup level intensity. We're seeing hits, physicality, people being leveled off of their feet. And the speed of this game is huge. I don't know if Jordan Binnington is going to be enough. And at the end of the day, I think that's going to be the big weakness for Canada. Because of that, I'm leaning towards the U.S. to win this game in a tight one, but I do think this should be a really good one. It's never going to be easy when you're going up against the forward pairing of Sidney Crosby, Connor McDavid, and Nathan MacKinnon all on a power play. That is a devastating first power play line. But the defense and the goaltending for Canada is something you can get past. The U.S. might not have the huge name shot makers, shot scorers, but they do have the defense, and most importantly, they have the goaltending. Even if they didn't have Connor Hellebuck, they've got Jake Ottinger, who's probably still the second best goalie in this tournament. This team is stacked. Both of these teams are stacked, and I cannot wait to see what happens as the game continues tonight. 0-0 as puck has just dropped. We'll keep you updated what's happening as anything happens throughout the rest of our show, but we're going to take a quick break here. When we come back, we turn our attention from hockey to the NFL. Massive news from the NFL as it was announced that the cap has gone up to $277 or to $281 million. That is a massive jump. We'll talk about what that means for these teams, what it means for free agents, and what other teams are expecting heading into the season. We'll be right back here on GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now. Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back to GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Thursday, February 20th, if you are just tuning in. We just finished going over what the Four Nations Face-Off final might look like as the U.S. takes on Canada. It just started. In this segment, we turn our attention over to the NFL. As massive news coming out of the biggest organization in sports, we have news on the cap, a drastic leap as the cap has gone from $255 million to anywhere between $277 and $281 million per team. A massive, massive leap. We'll talk about why that happened and much more. But before we do, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you're on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Thursday, February 20th. But like I was saying, we are going to get into a little bit of talk about the salary cap in the NFL. Like I said before, a massive, massive jump. The NFL announced that the salary cap is going to jump from $255 million to anywhere between $277 and $281. That is a near $20 million jump, $20 to $25 million more per team. And that, to put into a little bit of an idea for you, put it with a player value, that is how much a wide receiver would make on a franchise tag, for instance. Now, that might make you think of a certain team, but I want to take a bit of a big picture step back real quick before we get into that. Right now, the highest paid player in the NFL is Dak Prescott. And Dak Prescott will have made Dak Prescott will have made about 24% of the cap that the Cowboys had last season. Now, my personal idea when I like to look at contracts and how especially the cap is going to affect teams, and the reason why, these big numbers now seem a little bit easier later is because the cap is always going to grow. In fact, over the last 2 years, the cap has now grown over $53 million. It was around $200 million it was around $220 million just 2 years ago. It is crazy how fast the league is growing. It is an incredibly successful business. So when we're talking about the Bengals, for instance, yesterday, we said a little counterintuitive when you think about it out of the context of football, but the best way to be cheap as an owner is to extend quickly, because then those numbers get easier. Again, I think the most that a player should ever get against the cap is 25%. Last year, 25% of the cap would have been $63 million a year. I think 20% of the cap is the best way to have a more sustainable way if you're going to pay one player the max, but 25% I think is fine. For example, $51 million was the 20% mark last season. That's how much Jalen Hurts made, and you can see how well the Eagles were able to do with that. The ability for them to build around him, even with his big contract. This year, $55 million is that 20% mark. So that now does include quarterbacks like Jordan Love. Basically every single quarterback other than Dak Prescott is sitting at $55 million or less, although 25% brings all the way up to $69 million, which I think is what some teams, some quarterbacks, a Brock Purdy, for instance, might be using in negotiations, trying to get a huge bump in money, potentially trying to get more than Dak Prescott is getting. That's a near... This not only is going to help those players, because again, they're going to look at this and they're going to say, oh, we can go and ask for more money, but it's also going to help teams, right? There were plenty of cap-strapped teams heading into this offseason. We talked about the Falcons yesterday needing to cut a lot of cap. They went from negative $8 million against the cap to now a projected negative $3 million. They're still not out of it yet, but getting rid of $3 million as opposed to $8 million is a lot easier for them to do. It helps the Browns. It helps the Saints. It helps all these teams that are in cap purgatory right now, unable to get anything done because they are stuck in this cap situation where they can't go out and sign anybody. This is huge news. And the reason that it's going up is because the NFL, instead of just using the Nielsen numbers to give their teams a cap, try and figure out how many viewers they're getting, how big of a business it is, they started to look at the numbers for things of smart TVs. When we're looking at stuff like that, they're looking at streaming services, YouTube TV, looking at stuff that they were able to get off of internet viewers, which I know is how a lot of different people watch. Smart TVs don't connect to cable that much. You can use a Roku and stuff like that. So less and less people are using actual cable, which is why I think some of the numbers issues aren't as alarming for a league like the NBA. Like the NBA. The MLB has its own issues because they use traditional cable for a lot of their money on their teams, so that's going to be something that they need to figure out how to get into streaming. But for the NBA, I don't think the ratings really are that down. I'm sure they're down a little bit, but if they just look at things that are online, if they use the numbers that the NFL is using, you can see that the numbers probably aren't as much of an issue as they think. Now, a lot of this took not only the media by surprise, but it took teams by surprise too. Teams always do their little calculations. They always go out and they say, we think there's going to be this much money, and that's how they go out and start planning their offseason. This really took a lot of these teams by surprise. This has a lot more money than they were expecting. They were expecting about a $7 million jump. A $20 to $25 million jump is insane. So the NFL is doing its thing, and they're doing their thing absolutely fine. They're doing their thing better than just about anybody else ever did. But this is a huge thing. Again, now teams can go out and really play and really sign those extra guys. The Bengals, for example, are a really good example of that, right? They were staring this offseason down with really scared, right? They needed to go out and sign their three big guys, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and Trey Hendrickson, and they didn't quite have enough cap space to get it all done. You add an extra $20 million in cap space, that is an extra player if you're giving them a max contract, a huge contract near the top of their position group contract, or it's also 2 or 3 players if you wanted to shore up the defense a little bit. That is going to help these teams immensely get over the hump, bring in the guys they need to. It's also going to help give a little bit of a pay boost to some of these guys that we're expecting to break records. I expect there to be a huge jump in some positions like the defensive end position, a huge jump in maybe even the wide receiver position with Jamar Chase looking to reset the market, maybe a huge jump at the quarterback position with with Brock Purdy looking to reset the market. There's a lot of markets that might get reset, running backs as well. There's a lot of them out there, but we'll keep an eye on everything going on in NFL free agency. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we turn our attention over to an off-season format, little segment that we're going to continue doing, a dream off-season for the Carolina Panthers. We'll talk about what they need to do to improve after what was a successful season on their end as Bryce Young developed down the stretch. We'll be right back here on GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found. For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Thursday, February 20th, if you were just tuning in. We just finished going over what the salary cap increase means for a lot of teams in the NFL, a massive boost to the salary cap. In this segment, we turn our attention over to one team in particular in the NFL and what a dream offseason might look like, the Carolina Panthers. But before we do that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you're on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Thursday, February 20th. But like I was saying, we are going to get into the Carolina Panthers' perfect offseason. Last season might not seem like it was a success for the Carolina Panthers, but they finished at 5-12, third place in the NFC South, obviously missing the playoff. They have a top 10 draft pick this year, and the most important thing for them, and the reason last season was a success, is because Bryce Young really started to come into his own. There were some people calling him a bust, saying he wasn't NFL ready, saying that he was a waste of a number 1 overall pick. CJ Stroud really blossomed in his first season. We got to see a little bit of what made Bryce Young a special talent at Alabama. That being said, this team still has a lot of work to do. They have about $20 million in cap space with the new cap increase, and they have 21 pending free agents. Now, a lot of them aren't super important. A lot of them, you can let these guys walk, but there are a couple that I think that are important. You have your kicker and your punter. Johnny Hekker, who's one of the better punters in the league, and Eddie Pinheiro, who's in the top 3 for most accurate kicker in the history of the NFL. In fact, he even took the title from Justin Tucker for a little bit earlier last season. You also have your starting center in Austin Corbett, one of the top centers on the market. He's someone that they need to re-sign. They re-signed Andy Dalton as well as their long snapper already. You also have linebacker Shaq Thompson, cornerback Michael Jackson, and 5 safeties are free agents. You probably need to sign at least one of them. You want to re-sign, in my opinion, the best one out there, in Xavier Woods. So there's a lot of guys out there that I think are important for them to re-sign, but a lot that I think they can let walk. Shaq Thompson, Mike Jackson, Xavier Woods, Austin Corbett, Johnny Hekker, and Eddie Pinheiro, very important for them to bring back. When we look at what else this team needs, obviously, they need a defense. They have one real big star on defense, and it is Derrick Brown. Derrick Brown up the middle is one of the more impressive defensive players in the league. He's incredibly strong, physical, a great pass rusher, as well as a really good run defender up the middle, but he could use some help. Obviously, getting some help in the secondary would be huge. And when we're looking at the secondary market in the NFL, there's a couple names that are available. Obviously, DJ Reed, I think, is the big fish in the pond. But you also have guys like Byron Murphy, who just coming off of a really good season in Minnesota at corner. Stephon Gilmore as well, a little bit older. Rasul Douglas is available. There's plenty of corners out there for the Panthers to go out and get. You need to grab at least one of those. I think Byron Murphy is a guy that I would target if I were the Panthers. I also want to see the Panthers go out and get some pass rush. One of the most important things and what really helps cover up a lot of secondary stuff is the pass rush, right? If you're able to get pressure quickly, you can go and get a lot of these, and you can go and hide a lot of the issues and at depth in corners, right? As long as the quarterback is rushed, is hurried, they're more likely to make mistakes. As long as the quarterback is rushed and hurried, they're more likely to get sacked. They're more likely to make a negative play. So the pass rush is really the foundation of a defense. When they say you build in the trenches, they mean that on both sides of the ball, right? There's a couple guys out there that I think are really important for them to bring in. Right, you have Matt. You have a couple options. Khalil Mack, a little bit older, but has been incredibly impressive. I don't know if he's going to want to end his career in Carolina. Matt Judon is a guy that I look at from the Falcons as a free agent that would be really interesting. I think that's someone that if the Falcons don't re-sign, would be huge for them to bring back. Another guy a little bit less on the true pass rusher side, but Jerome Baker I think is really interesting. I like what he's been able to do throughout his career. I think bringing in Jerome Baker could be big for this defense. They also have the number 8 overall pick in the NFL draft, and they could go a lot of different ways with this. They need a wide receiver, and for free agency, they could go out and try and get a wide receiver. Amari Cooper is someone that I think would be really good for them to go out and get. He's not necessarily the youngest guy, but outside of outside of Adam Thielen, you don't have a super reliable receiver. Xavier Legette really struggled this season with a lot of the important he dropped a lot of balls, right? You also have Jalen Coker, who stepped up a little bit, David Moore, who's a free agent, not really worth bringing back in, but there's a couple wide receivers out there, Chris Godwin, if they were going to try and snatch him from the Bucs, but I think getting a guy that can be a true number one receiver, not trying to get a number 2 or a number 3 in Amari Cooper would be really huge for the development of Bryce Young. But getting back to the draft here, there's a couple guys that I think they would love to have. Mason Graham, the defensive tackle out of Michigan, is someone that I have been circling on the Panthers sheet for a very long time. He is the run stuffer in this draft. You pair him next to Derek Brown, that is one of the toughest interior defenses in all of the NFL. If they wanted to go up and shore out the cornerback side of the ball, go ahead and get a safety or a corner to fill out the secondary room, you can get Will Johnson, also out of Michigan, or Jody Barron out of Texas. Safety, we talked about him in our last episode, but Malachi Starks is a guy that I really like if they want to take him a little high at number 8. Maybe if T-Mac, Tetroa McMillan, is available there for them at number 8, that's the way you go, because he could be one of the better receivers in the league almost immediately, especially if he goes to the right spot. But the name I've been really circling, and the thing that I think they need to do the most, especially if they go and sign a free agent wide receiver, is go and get Mason Graham. I think he's the best interior defender in this draft, and adding him to that defense should do wonders on its own. This is a Carolina Panthers team that isn't going to go to the playoffs next season outside of potentially winning their division, right? This is a Carolina Panthers team, especially in a weak NFC South, that I think might be able to find their way in, but they're not going to go and be a Super Bowl team. What they can do is continue to develop and put Bryce Young in the best possible situation. The offense really did develop down the stretch. He kept them in a lot of these games. He kept them in games against the Eagles and the Chiefs. They were really competitive against these really good teams, these teams that made the Super Bowl, won the Super Bowl, went deep into the playoffs. So this is a team that I think is pretty close to being a good NFL team. Maybe not a contending NFL team, but a team that could fight for an NFC South crown, especially when your competition is the Bucs and the Falcons. But let me know what your thoughts are. I'd love to hear them. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we turn our attention over to the MLB. Another team for us to go through as the season is right around the corner. In this episode, we turn our attention over to the Astros. The Astros, a team that's had a pseudo-dynasty for a while. A lot has changed, though, recently. We'll see if the moves they made this offseason helped or hurt them in the coming MLB season. We'll be right back. You're on GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. Welcome back to GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Thursday, February 20th. If you were just tuning in, we just finished going over what the offseason might look like for the Carolina Panthers. In this segment, we turn our attention over to baseball, another team to preview as the MLB season is right around the corner. Today, we dive deep into the Houston Astros. But before we do that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you're on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, go ahead and throw that in the comments, throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Thursday, February 20th. But like I was saying, we are going to get into the fifth segment here on our show, that having to do with the Houston Astros. The Astros come into this season after having a really disappointing end to their year. They weren't able to make it to the AL Championship, to the AL Championship Series, ALCS, for the first time in 8 seasons. They had been there for 7 straight years, a pseudo-dynasty. They hadn't won enough to really have themselves be called a dynasty, but the best in the AL, no doubt about that. They'd been there, again, 7 straight trips over to the ALCS for the Houston Astros. That streak ended last season when they went 88-73. Won their division, won the AL West, but lost in the wild card round to the Detroit Tigers, falling in a 3-game series sweep 2-0. They weren't super active in free agency. They only went out and grabbed 3 players. They signed Christian Walker, the first baseman who formerly was of the Arizona Diamondbacks, to a 3-year, $60 million deal, as well as bringing in Brendan Rodgers, the second baseman on a minor league deal, and outfielder Ben Gamel and re-signing outfielder Ben Gamel to a 1-year contract. That was all they did as far as free agency additions go. But in the trade market, they made some of the biggest moves out there. They moved off of their former closer Ryan Presley to get Juan Bello, a starting pitcher for the Cubs. They also traded Kyle Tucker, one of the best bats in baseball, in exchange for Isaac Paredes, Cam Smith, a third base prospect, and a starting pitching prospect in Hayden Wesneski. Now, Wesneski, we'll talk about a little bit later, is someone that's going to come in and play a pretty big role for them, especially early on in the season as they wait for some injuries to fix themselves out. But the really interesting thing about this trade is the 2 made pieces. They move off of Kyle Tucker, send him to the Cubs. Kyle Tucker, who just by almost every metric is a better player than Isaac Paredes. But Isaac Paredes, I think, was built for Houston's ballpark. We'll get to that in a second, but they lost a whole lot in free agency. They lost Jose Urquidy. They lose Justin Verlander. They lose Yusei Kikuchi, 3 starting pitchers. Kikuchi, who hurts a little bit because they gave up so much for him at the trade deadline last year. They lose Jason Hayward in the outfield, Hector Neris in the bullpen, as well as Kendall Graveman and Caleb Ferguson. But the real big loss is Alex Bregman, their third baseman, who signed a contract with the Boston Red Sox instead of returning to the Astros. The Astros weren't a team that didn't offer him a contract. They gave him a 6-year, $140 million contract offer. He turned that down. He got a lot more money. He got a lot more average annual value money, $40 million a year from the Red Sox. But that is a huge loss for them, which takes us back to Isaac Paredes. Isaac Paredes is the third base replacement for Alex Bregman. And both him and Alex Bregman do one thing really well. They pull the ball like nobody's business. Isaac Paredes does not hit the ball hard. But what he does do is he hits the ball in the air, and he hits it just far enough into left field for him to be an issue at Tropicana Field, and most importantly for the Astros, in Houston. He goes in there, and the Houston Astros have the shortest left field wall in the entire major leagues. What Isaac Paredes does is he hits soft fly balls that just barely clear the wall. He is a guy that is going to come in and be an absolute machine for them. He's going to hit a lot more home runs than he should, and they're going to be those reverse unicorn home runs, the home runs that only happen in the single ballpark he's in. That is what his bread and butter is, and that's what he has thrived on. He is the perfect hitter for Minute Maid Park in Houston. That's exactly what they needed. Now, they did lose a lot. So let's look at the lineup that we have. Jose Altuve, who's tried out in left field based on the roster that they have, still listed at second base as on the Fangraph. The projected lineup is looking to lead off. Isaac Paredes, third baseman at second. Yordan Alvarez, one of the best pure hitters in baseball, hitting third. You've got Christian Walker hitting fourth at first base. Yanier Diaz, their catcher, hitting fifth. Jeremy Pena, the World Series MVP, hitting sixth. You have right fielder Chas McCormick hitting seventh. Left fielder Ben Gamel, eighth, / Brendan Rodgers, who's the second baseman. If they put Brendan Rodgers in there, maybe we see a little bit of Jose Altuve in left field. Jake Myers at center, routing out the lineup at the 9 hole. Now, this lineup isn't as star-studded up and down 1 through 9 as some of these other Houston Astros lineups have been, but Jose Altuve, Paredes, Alvarez, Walker, that is a deadly 1 to 4. You also have some pretty solid bats at the bottom half. Pena, McCormick, Yanier Diaz, all have had pretty solid seasons. They're not going to have that huge pop, but they've got pretty good bats, and that is not a lineup that you want to take lightly. The projected rotation is where the issues start to come in. We listed all the starting pitchers that they lost this offseason. Jose Urquidy, Justin Verlander, Yusei Kikuchi, 3 guys that would have been a part of their starting rotation if they had stayed on. Now you look at the projected rotation on opening day. You've got Framber Valdez as your 1, Hunter Brown at 2, Ronel Blanco at 3, Spencer Arrighetti at 4, and Hayden Wesneski at 5. Now, that might not sound like the greatest lineup, the greatest rotation, because it isn't. They have 3 guys on injured reserve that should come back soon. Luis Garcia has come in and pitched huge innings for them. So has Lance McCullers Jr. and Christian Javier. If they're able to get those 3 back, those 3 have various different levels of injuries, have had their surgeries done at various different timetables. This team automatically looks a little bit better. But when you look at the starting 5 right now, Wesneski and Arrighetti at the bottom, Ronel Blanco, who threw a no-hitter last season, but he's not a guy that really had great numbers outside of an outing or 2. Hunter Brown and Framber Valdez are good, but they're not guys you want to rely on as your 1-2 punch. This is a rotation that could get them in trouble. When we take a look at the bullpen, you have one of the best closers in the game in Josh Hader. A really good setup man in Brian Abreu for the 8th inning, Taylor Scott for the 7th inning, and then a solid bullpen when you're looking at the middle relievers. Brian King, Caleb Ward, Forrest Whitley, guys like that down the line. This is a bullpen that isn't going to be as dominant as it was supposed to be last season. Now, it wasn't a perfect bullpen last season. In fact, Josh Hader didn't have his great year. Neither did Ryan Presley. Ryan Presley moved out of there, but that was a deadly 1-2 punch right there if those two had returned to form. The over-under for this team is currently set at 86.5 wins. Now, last season, they ended up winning 88 games. They only played 161 because they had already clinched their division, but I think this team has gotten a little worse. They just lost so much. I really do like the addition of Isaac Paredes, but losing a bat like Kyle Tucker is really going to hurt this team. Losing a bat like Alex Bregman is really going to hurt this team, and especially when it comes down to the starting pitching. These guys just have really struggled to stay healthy for the long time with the Houston Astros, and I have trouble thinking that they're going to be able to get magically healthy and stay healthy all season long. So because of that, I have the Astros missing the playoffs this season, actually finishing at 84 and 78. But let me know what you think. What do you think the Houston Astros are going to do? Anthony asked, does Houston have enough in their system to trade for Sandy Alcantara. I mean, I don't know if they do. I don't think they do. I also don't think that they would. They gave up a lot for Yusei Kikuchi. They gave up a lot of their top prospects for Kikuchi last trade deadline. They don't really have the firepower to trade for what it would take for a former Cy Young winner in Alcantara. But this is a move that if the Marlins were truly trying to offload him, they could probably get a lot for him from some other team. I just don't think the Astros really have it in them, and they have the 3 guys on the injured list that will come back, and I don't think it would be a great investment for them to go get him. But at the end of the day, we'll see what happens with the Houston Astros down the stretch. But thank you, everybody, so much for tuning in to today's episode of GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. Before we go, we have a score update for the Four Nations final. Canada struck first, up 1-0 after a Nathan McKinnon goal. As it stands right now, that's where the score is at 4:31 to go in the first period. We will be back tomorrow covering whatever happens during the rest of this game, as well as everything else from around the world of sports. I can't wait to see you guys then. You all have a good one. Bye-bye.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.